Okay, so today we're going to talk about unethical communication, how not to communicate. So last time we talked about different forms of SciComm. We came up with our own SciComm in a format that we preferred. Today we're going to talk about unethical communication, also known as how not to communicate, because there are certain ways that you want to communicate and there are certain ways that you don't want to communicate. So today we're going to talk about how not to communicate. So what are ethics? So one thing that I've noticed in communication outside of, so science communication is specific to scientific field. In some ways you can think about it as an outgrowth of science, but there's also like communications in general, like marketers or public relations people like that. Ideally, science communicators would be steeped in the same sort of environment, but there's kind of some big problems with communication ethics, and a lot of times marketers feel like their goal should be to get people to do something regardless of what that is and regardless of the ethics, and we'll talk about a couple of examples of that. But in general, I think scientists are in a good place too, because they're good at considering many sides of an issue, and I think scientists have a very strong moral compass in a way, and also science is so influential and important that if it's misused, that can be really disastrous for people's health, for the environment, etc. So we definitely need to talk about ethics. So that's what we're going to do today. So ethics in communication involves being aware of the ways that one's communication behavior may lead to consequences, as well as respecting disagreement and others' points of view. So unethical communication is basically how not to communicate, and sometimes in life we learn from our mistakes. There's a lot of examples of that. If you want to communicate ethically, you have to know how to not communicate so that you can avoid falling into the traps of others. So unethical communication doesn't adhere to the ethical standards needed for effective, clear, truthful, and free communication. Sometimes it deceives, promotes misinformation or slander. It can also include actions such as plagiarism, which go against ethical standards, and it may hinder civil or political rights, such as freedoms of speech or religion. So there's a guy on Quora, Goran Tomsic. He gave some examples of unethical communication. So talking about outcomes that you know are unrealistic in marketing, such as pyramid schemes, or you show someone that lost, 100 pounds on a diet plan, and you don't say that the results are not typical and that everyone that goes on this doesn't lose that amount of weight, because you're kind of deceiving people. Misrepresenting facts to potential investors as a business owner, lying about your revenue, for instance, paying for biased research, then using those results to promote products that are harmful to people. Sharing information you promise to keep private, spreading lies about a political candidate in an effort to make them lose their political race. And here in the US, the election season is heating up, and it's hard because both candidates, you could say that their communication, they have to make sure that their communication is ethical, because it's very easy as someone that is in power to just say stuff about people, but that, as I talk about later, that's a great way to actually lose trust with people once they figure out what you're doing. So the best way to avoid unethical communication is to know what it is and work to actively avoid it. Preventing unethical communication from happening is the best way to avoid all of the pitfalls of dealing with the fallout of a miscommunication or unethical communications crisis. So here's 6 forms of unethical communication, and this is from our blog on the Fancy Comma blog. So there's destructive communication. That's like, we just had a debate here between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and I kind of saw some of these attacks, like character assassinations, prejudice, slander. Slander is when you say something about someone that's not correct. Character assassination, well, it's a question, like, is it really character assassination to point out that Donald Trump is a felon right now? Some people might say that is a form of destructive communication. Others might say that it is not a form of destructive communication. And that probably falls along party lines for Democrats and Republicans. I've noticed this is definitely a very weird, the communications, if you pay attention to the communications coming out of the Biden and Trump campaigns, they're just, it's hard to listen to them. And I think it's because their communication border on unethical communication sometimes, and there's a lot to say there, but coercive communication intimidates, threatens, is tyrannical and stifling to achieve a purpose. There's a lot of examples of coercive communication, intimidating communication, threats. Those are never a good way to communicate. Usually, they can usually be illegal. Manipulative, exploitative is fear mongering. This is one of those things that marketers actually say is good because you can get people to act. Like if you scare someone into action, and that's something that copywriters do, manipulates and exploits the audience's ignorance, prejudice, or fears. So one thing in the COVID pandemic was people thought that, oh, if we like scare people into action, then they will want to get the COVID vaccine. And then it turned out that that didn't work. So you can't manipulate people into doing things. You have to communicate ethically and build trust with them. Deceptive communication misleads people. It may omit information or use half-truths. Secretive communication is avoidant. It tries to sweep discussions under the rug. And finally, we have intrusive communication, and the royal family in England has this problem a lot where they pry or share information obtained by prying, like the paparazzi are a great example of intrusive communication. I know Taylor Swift has like put herself into like a box and like she's been like the construction workers came and like carted this box, and it turned out the box actually had Taylor Swift in it, so she could avoid the paparazzi. So I don't really know how Taylor Swift lives like that, because that she's living in an unethical communication world. So those are six forms of unethical communication, and sometimes I notice that these happening a lot in political communication because I don't know why this happens so often in political communication, like manipulating people, deceiving, or like the opponent will say like, oh, my opponent is deceptive, he is coercive or something. So they can kind of be weaponized, but it's important to know what is truly unethical and what isn't unethical, because voters have to decide, and voters care a lot about the ethics of their president, obviously. Okay, so this is my last slide, but I wanted to tell you about basically a case study that has happened in the US about ethical communication, and it relates to tobacco companies, because here in the United States, the tobacco companies, they were sued when I was in high school, like 1990s or so, and based on those lawsuits, like here in Oklahoma, they established a fund, and our fund is called TSET, and we get basically the tobacco companies, because they deceived people for so long about how addictive cigarettes were and what they were doing to make their products more addictive, and the advertisements they had, sometimes advertising to children and stuff, they had to pay into this fund. And then that fund has been basically funding the state of Oklahoma's like different health initiatives, smoking cessation programs, and so on. And I took this picture. I was going to the gas station. I think I was getting some water, and I got out of my car and I looked at this sign and I was like, wow, because if you look at the top of this, it says, a federal court has ordered Philip Morris USA and RJ Reynolds Tobacco, which is tobacco company here in the US, to state there is no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. And so I was like, that's crazy. A federal judge ordered them to write this. So, and I did some research and I looked it up, and I found that even 20 years after the federal courts kind of tried to get the tobacco companies to behave more ethically, they're still being sued every day, because that's the only product I've heard of where you use it and there are health downsides. It's addictive. But people keep selling it, and it's still profitable because it's so addictive. And back in the day, they used to advertise to children. Now that's kind of changed because now children are getting like advertised fruit flavored vapes and stuff like that. But um, all of this to say that, and if you go to, we have a blog on our website that where you can actually Google this lawsuit. So the the purpose of the lawsuit was to force the tobacco companies to communicate more ethically because, for example, things that you don't know about the tobacco companies is they do research to make their products more effective, to make their products more addictive, and then they just sell those products. So they're constantly working to make their products more addictive. They don't educate you about how to smoke safely because there is no way to smoke. So there's so many health hazards, and I guess one way that tobacco companies have stayed in business is they've just not communicated about these health hazards, because if people really knew what this did to them and if they had access to, maybe they would be like, if you're a kid or something, someone gives you a cigarette, the box has like a bunch of warnings that are like this, you probably will think twice before you start smoking or use tobacco products. So you don't want to have a federal court to write your marketing documents. And what I found so amazing about this was the federal court ordered the tobacco company to state this. So this is like the worst case scenario for companies. If you don't communicate ethically, others will do it for you, and like federal courts can do it for you. And there's also a number of regulations here in the US and also in other nations. The Federal Trade Commission, or FTC, regulates a lot of um, ad practices. Like if you have like an email, if you have like a product and there's a number of deceptive practices that people can do, like adding junk fees is one type of deceptive practice. Another is um, having a really complicated opt-out process. You can get sued for that as a company, or failing to disclose things like this. So that's like we could probably do an entire class just on unethical communication in the tobacco industry. And I really don't even know why this industry still exists. I've read recently that they actually branched into the food industry to make food products more addictive, like junk food products, highly processed foods more addictive. So um, I don't see anything good about this industry, and I feel sad for everyone that makes their money from this industry, because I don't know what they're going to. My hope is over time that tobacco stops being an industry, but we all know that's not how the world works. So um, that was about it. I mean, as a health and science communicator, that's pretty much probably the standard viewpoint on that. But that's all we have for the lecture. Let me stop recording and then we can chat.